You're listening to the best of the bravest. Interviews with the FDNY's elite. And good evening. We got one more show before the summer break. I'll get into that later. Welcome back to another episode of the Mike Pena podcast. I believe this is going to be episode 188. If I have that count wrong, hey, it's hot out. It's June. My brains are fried at this point. But nevertheless, I think we're in good for a good show. Last episode was a really good show. It was volume 23 of Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's bomb squad. Retired NYPD bomb squad detective Brian Hearn was on the show. Brian did 16 of his 27 years in the bomb squad. He got there in 1995, and within the first year, he was defusing pipe bombs left behind by the New York version of the Zodiac Killer, working the crash of TWA Flight 800, amongst everything else. And he told me his very, very harrowing story of survival on 9/11, remembered his late colleague in the bomb squad, Claude Richards, who sadly became the sixth member in bomb squad history to die in the line of duty when he was killed in the line of duty that day. So we go from that to another mini-series, from the bomb squad to the best of the bravest, interviews with the FDNY's elite. Volume 19 with the returning guest. I promised I'd have him back for a part two, and tonight is bound to be a very interesting part two for this reason. June 6th, 1993. A summer Sunday in New York City, as the residents of Rockaway and Queens, of course, slept, chaos in the form of a cargo ship soon descended upon them. The Golden Venture's voyage of doom began as a criminal endeavor on the shores of Bangkok, Thailand, a smuggling operation ordered from a gangster's Chinatown apartment. With nearly 300 passengers on board, in addition to 13 crew members, its grounding ashore presented a massive rescue operation, the kind rarely seen before or since. And tonight I'm joined by one of the men who was there, a seasoned firefighter in Brooklyn's legendary Rescue 2. He answered the call that night and operated at a mission that almost 30 years later still boggles the mind. He was on for volume 14 of the best of the bravest, interviews with the FDNY's elite. He returns tonight for volume 19, and that is retired FDNY Rescue 2 and Rescue 1 alumni, Lieutenant Mike Pena. Lieutenant, welcome back. How are you?
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me back. Appreciate it.
No, I was looking forward to this, so we were able to have a great interview the first time. I'm sure we'll have another good one tonight. So that night, summer night, we just passed the anniversary yesterday, getting the call, of an unusual operation, like I said in the introduction, never seen before, really never seen since. I'll let you take it from there.
Okay, I'm just going to put the cart before the horse a little bit with just setting the stage of how this actually started. You mentioned it in your opening about, starting off from Bangkok, coming across. This is an illegal smuggling ring that people coming from China were paying up to like $40,000 a piece to be ferried to the United States. It started off with, them getting on the ship, going to Bangkok, staying there. They were in a safe house there for about 2 months, waiting for the ship and other passengers to come on board. And when we talk about the freighter itself, the ship itself, it wasn't really a big freighter as we think, like the ocean-going liners. This was a little bit of smaller ship. It was about 150 so odd feet in length, much older vessel. So the conditions there wasn't, coming across on a cruise ship or anything like that. They were probably just buried down in the hold, down below. I know they were given meager rations coming across, limited amount of food, water, things like that. Cramped styles, unsanitary conditions. So they spent about 4 months on that ship coming to America. The plan was through the smugglers was to bring them on board, ferry them over to the United States up to either New York or Boston, I believe. And then when they get close to the coast, coordinate with the smugglers on the ground here in the States, and then ferry the passengers onto smaller boats and get them onto shore and to awaiting vehicles, and then off into the unknowns and get them onto American soil. What happened was the ship came to reach the United States probably about a month or so before. The gang on land that was waiting for the other smugglers were arrested in a crime spree that got caught up with, and where they wound up getting arrested. So there was no coordination on the land for them to ferry anybody off into the small boats and then onto the land. So that brings us up where the smugglers on this ship didn't know what else to do, so they figured, let's just ground it. We get close enough to the shore, people can jump off, wait ashore, and then they're free to go wherever they want to go. And that's when we came into, the first call we received was a boat in distress with people in the water. I think the first call into 911 came from probably, I think, a Parks Department personnel there at Fort Taunton, killed in Rockaways, where they heard screaming in the night, voices in the water going on. They went to investigate and noticed a ship out just offshore and people coming ashore in from the water. That started off the 911 call to all emergency services. We were in Brooklyn at the time. We were one of the two dive rescues in the FDNY, Rescue 5 and ourselves. I don't believe Rescue 4 was scuba qualified at that time, but they had water capabilities for surface rescue. The companies on the beach in Rockaway, a lot of companies there themselves. So one of the things we looked at was, getting a call. Normally, at that time of year, Breezy Point, Rockaways, it's that time of year, a lot of fishermen are out with their boats. They're getting their boats in the water for the first time. A lot of them are not used to, going in the surf and navigating the waters. We got a lot of boats running to the ground, into the jetties there. And normally throughout the summer, we got a lot of calls for persons in the water, persons in distress, or even boats in distress in that area. So we're not unfamiliar with that area. So the call came in probably about 2 o'clock, 2:30 in the morning for us as a normal, boat sinking, people in the water. That's the initial information we received in quarters. And at that time, we just, got on. We had, divers on board already. I was driving that night, so just luckily for us, just head down Flatbush Avenue, 2 o'clock in the morning. Very little traffic, so we made it there very quickly. Luckily, the scene itself was right over on the other side of Rockaway, on the beach side, right opposite the Marine Parkway Bridge. So right down Flatbush Avenue over the bridge, we were right there. The first two companies in Rockaway were already on the beach, slicing things up. And as we got closer, reports started getting a little bit more detailed about a larger boat, larger vessel with multiple people in the water. Going there, we still didn't know what was going on. Whether it was a small boat, a fishing boat, a fishing party boat, what type of boat it was. So, until we got there and get eyes on ourselves, we really didn't know what we were going to encounter when we arrived on scene.
Lieutenant Mike Pena is our guest tonight. This is volume 19, The Best, the Bravest, interviews with the FDNY's elite. We're doing a deep dive tonight into the 1993 Golden Venture Rescue. More with Mike in just a second, but a shout out to our friends in the live chat, John Albanese, Jay Driscoll, Clandefarious, Shalom Obam, okay, Ruth Ann Griffin, Joe Maliga, and of course, retired NYPD Chief of Department Lou Anamone tuning in via LinkedIn. Hey, Chief, best wishes, Mike and Mike. I was there for the aftermath. 0630. Hey, Chief, good to see you. I'll try to get you back on the show pretty soon. Always good talking to my friend Chief Anamone. So, you talked about it being very late in the night. It was 2 o'clock in the morning when the ship ran ashore. And that said, I mean, you guys are certified in black water diving, but this is really black water diving because it's the dead of night. And even if you probably have lights from other parts of the city because it's a city that never sleeps, it's still a difficult operation when, quite frankly, you can't see. So from assessing where this ship is, and not just where it is, I mean, it's hard to miss even in the middle of the night. It's a large ship. Assessing where the people are in the water and making sure that you're not trampling over them trying to get in the water to get them out. Take me through that part of it.
This situation was very unique because, when we arrived, the divers jumped out at a position, the rig we can get our equipment off. And then we, went down to the beach. At that time, there was multiple victims on the beach. Both PD, fire department, and EMS were already on the scene treating people and still taking people out of the water. There was multiple people, bobbing out in the surf. Our first thought was, let's hold off with the dive, operation until we find out what's actually going on. And the people we can see, we can rescue right away. We want to make sure we get these people out of the water before they do drown. It was a heavy surf that night, probably 3 to 4 foot waves. The current was really moving, going down across the sand, and people getting swept away. So it wasn't just in front of us. It was, maybe 100-yard operational area where people were coming ashore, wading in the water, floundering in the waves and things like that. So our first concern was just surface victims, getting them out of the water. There was some unconscious people they were pulling out. EMS was working on them as well as, PD and FD. And we were just in there trying to get as many people out of the water as we can. That was our first and primary concern, is the people we can save, get them out right away. And then, look to see, once we got them secure on land, and then see if we can get accountability of who actually is missing, if we need to start dive operations or not. So it's, more or less sizing up the situation and finding out what our priority was, which was immediate life safety. So everybody was in the water, PD, EMS, and fire department, pulling people out in the water, putting them on the sand, trying to, get them into one area, find out what's going on. At that time, we had no idea what exactly these people, where they were from, what type of ship it was, why they were, beached or anything like that. So we were just dealing with the information we had right in front of us, and it was just life safety at that time.
And I have the numbers in front of me. It says the survivors, 262 men, so they were mostly men, 24 women, and 14 children were taken into custody by the INS. 6 of them escaped. So, before this can become a criminal probe, obviously, as you said, it's a rescue probe. So I'll ask you, part of it was diving into the water. You might still have people on the ship. Was there an immediate effort to try to scale that ship?
Not immediately. Immediately, we had so many people in the water. Our first concern was getting them out of the water. Some of the barriers we had right away was a language barrier. We noticed that all the people were Oriental. Okay, they didn't speak English. We went through, both PD and FD. We went through PD to see if we can get interpreters through, whether it be, NYPD itself or through OEM, and try to get, people on scene to find out exactly and interview these people, interrogate these people. What's going on? How many people are on the ship? How many people were on the ship? So we can get a tally and start accounting for all survivors. So basically, in the initial stages, it was just life safety, just taking people out of water, trying to bring them on shore, trying to coordinate. EMS was trying to triage as much as they can. NYPD was trying to, start their investigation right away to find out what's going on. And at that time, all these agencies are still calling in additional resources. So now it's getting more and more crowded on the beach with responders. So, but we still had a lot of people in the water. We noticed people still coming off the ship. There was 2 drop ladders on both sides of the ship, and people were still climbing down. We could see those mainly with the hand lights. We didn't have marine companies on the scene or aviation on the scene at that time. So it was mainly by hand lights. So we really didn't get a good picture of the ship itself and what was going on there. We didn't put the inflatable boats in the water until a little while after, once we got most of the people out of the water. So at that time, once we got the boats in the water, then we were able to assess the situation with the ship itself.
So in a situation like this, you mentioned so many agencies being there. This is pre the EMS merger with the FDNY, so they are obviously operating there. You also have the NYPD. You probably have Truck 9 there from the Emergency Service Unit, as well as Truck 10, since both those trucks cover Queens. And I'll ask you, because this is 4 months after the Trade Center bombing in '93. So there was a lot of lessons learned there about how to properly coordinate amongst the agencies, especially with the NYPD and FDNY being the 2 primary agencies in charge of operations like this. Do you feel that what had happened 4 months prior helped smooth the operation here, or smooth the response to the operation here as far as coordination went?
Most likely it did. But this situation, there was so many victims in the water,
Right.
we would welcome any rescuers to come on board and help us out. So between the PD and FD and getting these people out of the water, we saved, I don't know how many lives of these people that were just, they weren't actually swimming to shore. Most of them were just, getting carried in by the waves and getting washed ashore. And those who weren't were just floundering in the water. Between the fire department divers, the other firefighters that were just in civilian clothes going into the water, pulling them out, as much as ESU with their dry suits and everything else going in, everybody had a hand to play in this, and it was. I think the coordination was seamless because we had so much to do, and it worked very well. As things slowed down, then we started getting a little bit more command and control, and it started working even better because we were able to rely on NYPD to bring on aviation overhead to find out exactly what's going on in the ship. The marine companies started showing up both from FD and PD. So we were able to get more light on the ship. And one of the things, the ship was a little bit more shallow water and right next to the jetty. So it was very precarious for the marine companies to come across. And I don't think they were able to get close to it right away to see what was going on.
No. Sorry about that. So, of course, and I will say this for those of you watching via YouTube, I forgot to mention this at the top. If you would like, you're not obligated to, but if you would like to, you can contribute a super chat as well, since finally we're over 1,000 subscribers and we can do that, baby. I'm in getting salty territory now. So if you want to contribute that, You most certainly can. And Steve-O, retired NYPD lieutenant, says the 5th Precinct, which is in Chinatown, sent 12 to 8 police officers, as far as the tour goes, 12 midnight to 8 in the morning, who spoke Chinese to assist as translators, which the New York Times does make mention of. And even one of the sergeants who was a translator on scene mentioned that even by human smuggling conditions, this was a terrible ship. And you mentioned it at the top, giving the history of it. I mean, I have it as well here in Wikipedia, in which it said that these passengers were forced to live on a diet of, quote, rice, peanuts, dirty water, and spoiled food during that 4-month voyage. So you can imagine the desperation. And you mentioned something regarding riptide earlier, and it plays into one of the questions I wanted to ask you. I'm sure you guys train for it, because in water, especially, given during certain times of the year, you train for any scenario. Sometimes the waves are calm, obviously, sometimes they're not. And on this night, you mentioned the riptides being a difficult thing to try to work through. When the riptides are very, very active, how can that possibly compromise a rescue operation? And how have you guys trained to work around that?
It can compromise the rescue situation, because it has to be identified right away with the riptide. It's going to be pulling people out into the water rather than bringing us to shore. So you have to go back to your basic swimming training of how to work within the riptide, going out and then going to the sides. It's just a different way of maneuvering the rescue of the victim. Most of the time, with fire department, we try to be tethered. This way, if we get a victim, we can, get pulled to shore if needed, and really save our strength to go out if we need to go out and get another victim. Especially in Rockaway during the summer months, we get a lot of drowning victims. Lifeguards do a great job, but they can't locate the body. They either call, they'll call 911 for a police and fire response. At that time, usually, aviation will be dropping divers in the deeper water. We'll be going from the shore and trying to, locate the body that way. And working with the currents, the tides, the waves, and everything else, it is a challenge, but you have to train for it like everything else. You have to get used to it. You have to get in the water. This is a year-round operation as well. It's not just, June, July, and August when the water's, fairly decent. January and February, people will both still, drop people off into the water. So, we have to rely on our basic training first, and then, go into the advanced training with the dive programs. Luckily, being in New York City, I know I speak for myself, spending my summers in Rockaway, I knew those beaches very well. So, spent most of my life learning how to swim there. So it does help that way. But, the training is most important, especially with the dive programs.
Let's go back to the language barrier, because that's an interesting point. It's one thing to have to try to give them instructions regarding, hey, latch onto this so I can bring you in, when they can't understand you. There's injuries here. And there's also fatalities here. There's 10 of them, to be exact. 10 people did drown. I'll get to that in a second. But as far as the injuries are concerned, it's difficult when you don't have those translators there yet, and they would get there a little bit later, courtesy of the NYPD, as Steve-O, who's a retired lieutenant from the NYPD, mentioned. But as far as obviously trying to figure out, okay, where are they hurt and what do they need? How can I properly treat them? At least before the translators arrived, and then, of course, later after they arrived, and can better paint the picture on behalf of those victims. Tell me about that once you got to the shore.
Sure. I think I believe that the police translators were the first ones on scene. So they were immense help getting coordination with EMS for treating the victims, getting them the medical attention they need, finding out what was wrong with each victim, going through and helping them that way. But the PD had a larger mission there too. It wasn't just water rescue. A lot of these people coming off the ship, got on the beach and just ran away. They started going to the neighborhoods and hiding in the porches and backyards and things like that. So as much as it was a search and rescue in the water, PD had their hands full tracing people down through the neighborhoods over in Breezy Point and Rockaway. So, the translators were, trying to, calm these people down when they were encountered, and trying to talk to them and saying, you're not in danger. We're not here to, help, hurt you in any way, things like that, where the interpreters would be, a great help, not only with, medical professionals, but also on the law enforcement side, which, thank God the NYPD has great outreach with their interpreters and different languages in the department. It's the largest department.
Rescue 2 carries so much on their rig, and it's not just you guys that are there. There's other rescues and there's other companies that are there as well. This is an all hands on deck type effort. But so specifically in an operation of this magnitude, of course, you have tools that can go into the water. But how much of that toolbox, which is what the rig really is, as we covered the first time you were on the show, how much were you taken off? And and to go back to initially arriving there, we talked. Remember, we talked about the size up process. You told me it starts as soon as you get the call. On the way down there, what was the discussion in the rig? I know you were driving, so maybe not too much on your end, but what was the thought process in your head? Okay, we're going to need this tool for this reason. We'll probably need this too. And then getting there and realizing, yeah, we should probably get more of this, that, and the other.
Right. Initially, probably the difference in what they were discussing is, we have the primary and secondary diver already set up at roll call, so everybody has their positions. What they'd be looking at is, what equipment we need. We're going to go in with us. If it's going to be a scuba operation, what gear do we need? How do we get it down to the beach? We were very lucky because, usually we get a call down, it's in Breezy Point, and the walk from the road to the water is hundreds of yards, if not more. And we have to ferry that equipment usually on our shoulders or carry it down to the water. Luckily, we're closer to the water with this event. But what they would be looking at is, okay, who's going to carry the gear? Each attender is going to be assigned to each diver carrying their equipment. We usually have the diver just in his dry suit, carrying his fins and his harness, getting down to the water as quickly as possible, not to wear them out. And the tender would usually carry the scuba bottles and all the other equipment. And one of the other things too is what we do is, the chauffeur and usually one person stays at the rig itself in case we need the boat. We carry an inflatable boat on the rig as well as a 25 or 15 horse outboard motor in case we have to, go out into the water. So if they call for any additional equipment, we have 2 people at the rig that can ferry it back to the beach to the divers themselves. So we try to get the divers to the water as quickly as possible to initiate the search. And if we need to put them into the water, the tenders will set that up right away, hook them up to a line, put them in the water, set up communications with the diver, send out 1 diver at a time to do the search pattern. The backup diver would stay on shore and coordinate in case the first diver gets in trouble or needs assistance. He would go into the water at that time. Anybody else would stay at the rig and ferry back and forth any additional equipment they need. If they run out of bottles, scuba bottles, they need more air, we would bring that down to the shore. Or if they need the boat or any additional equipment, we would be there to do that.
Yeah, there's always a point, man. It's the same thing with emergency service for the NYPD, as we were talking about. Somebody always stays with the rig, which is a good thing. And as we talked about the first time you were on the show, one always has to know where these tools are so that, in situations like that where it's urgent and life is hanging in the balance, you can get these guys and gals what they need relatively quickly. And so referencing in the New York Times article here from December 2nd, 1998, regarding the conviction of the mastermind of this plot, which we'll get to later, it does mention the fatalities. Like I said, so there's 10 of them. And it mentions here in the article specifically that some of these individuals perished, not just from drowning, but also from hypothermia. I don't know if every single one of them was located right away or if some unfortunately washed up a few days later. But for those that were found right away, and I know that you were back and forth and doing a lot of different things during this operation. Tell me about treating those that unfortunately didn't survive.
I believe the total at that night initially was 8 victims passed away. As you said, it could have been from drowning or hypothermia. You got to look back at these people in the hull of a ship, steel hull ship, no heat, very limited water. Now jumping into like a 55, 57 degree ocean, it's going to take the toll right away as soon as they hit the water. So, and these people weren't strong enough to begin with. And now jumping into the water under high surf into an unknown, place here that they've never seen before and trying to get ashore in heavy wave conditions. So I would say majority did drown. There probably were some that were overtaken by hypothermia and unfortunately with the drowning as well. So it's very difficult that way. I believe there was 2 other victims that were bodies washed ashore a day or 2 later. So it was a crime scene for a long time, for a couple of days until everyone was accounted for. And that goes back to the original thing. We never knew how many people were on board. So this was an operation that went on. More or less, the PD took it on as a crime scene after that, and they were there and trying to account for people that they had no accountability for. It was probably a monumental, challenge for them. Getting account, letting know not only the people that were on board, but the crew themselves, the smugglers. How do you separate the smugglers from the victims? Who's who? They're all jumping into water at the same time. So it was very challenging in that way, I can imagine.
And the crew members too. The exact quote in the article here is the nightmarish from December 2nd, 1998 edition of the New York Times says the nightmarish 4-month journey of the Golden Venture began off the coast of Thailand, as we covered at the top, and wound through the Indian and Atlantic Oceans. It ended on June 6, 1993, when the freighter was ordered to run aground on the Rockaway Peninsula in Queens, and the nearly 300 immigrants on board were told to swim ashore in the early morning darkness. 10 of the passengers drowned or died of hypothermia from the effort, which, and this is the interesting part, which required a long swim through rough waters because the ship ended up on a sandbar 200 yards offshore. Now, let's focus on that for a second, because for those that may not be familiar with water terminology, a sandbar, what exactly is that?
Sandbar is a buildup of sand underneath the water surface.
Mm-hmm.
That's higher than a normal sand. It depends on the tides and the currents that would build up the sand. Rockaway has jetties going out into the water, rock jetties going out into the water as well to catch the sand. So the ship came close to the jetty. It most likely ran aground on that. One of the things that we looked at was, hopefully the ship itself wasn't going to start bouncing off the jetty and start, damaging the hull and causing that to take on water, depending on how many people were still back down in the hull of the ship. But the sandbar itself is a shallow part that the ship ran aground on. And what happened is, like I said earlier, with the two ladders coming down on both sides of the ship, we can see the people, trying to climb down. As they get down to the bottom rungs of the ladders, these large waves are just taking them and just knocking them right off the ladder and just putting them right into the surf. And there was a lot of people between the ship and the jetty itself that were in very precarious positions. So it was a matter of trying to get them as quickly as possible, get them out of the surf. And you had mentioned earlier about, anybody going on board. I believe we put a fire department rubber boat into the water. I believe it was another rescue company that manned it, went out to the ship and trying to get people to, as they're coming off the ladder, putting them into the boat to bring them to shore. At that point, they radioed to the shore, to the battalion chief on shore to say, do you want us to go on board and, try to stop people from jumping into the water? And at that time, we had a little bit more information, and we still weren't sure what was going on. So I believe the battalion chief, we talked to the NYPD commander on scene, and I think it was determined it was be safer for NYPD to man the ship, board it, and try to find out what was going on. At least they were armed if anything should happen on the ship. Right. So I believe the NYPD, wound up boarding the ship, trying to keep everybody on board rather than jumping into the water.
In a rescue operation like this, and we're talking with retired FDNY Lieutenant Mike Pena, this is volume 19 of the Best of the Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. One of the critical things that doesn't get talked about enough, at least not by people like me that are on the outside of the fire service, it should be more, is establishing a means of egress. Now, granted, when you got there, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. You mentioned it was pretty easy to get down there because traffic wasn't that heavy. But the longer this operation goes on, New York can only stay dormant for so long. People are getting up. They're getting ready for their workday. They were sleeping. They don't have a clue this is going on for the most part. So you run into people who are going to start their day, and now the streets are beginning to flood with civilian traffic. So that said, as far as making sure, granted, the NYPD had a hand in road closures, of course, but the FDNY still plays a key role as does EMS in making sure an egress is there. Once you're on shore and there's still so much to do, tell me about the egress part first, establishing it and then keeping it.
The area where the boat came ashore with Fort Tilden there was mainly one road that came off from the bridge, came around a park area, and it was very limited access. It was just 2 access points to that one road that was closest to the ship where it came ashore. That filled up right away with emergency vehicles. So one of the things that, most likely NYPD established was entry points and started staging areas for EMS to get ambulances in and out. The initial vehicles from NYPD and FDNY probably was stuck right in the middle there for the duration of the event. At that time, carrying the victims that were in ambulatory up to the roadway to transport them to hospitals as quickly as possible was established, both through EMS and the fire department and NYPD. So it was, probably a big challenge for them just to get the access roads open I believe there was a large parking area like north of the beach where we were. So most likely, I wasn't privy to this, but most likely, hopefully, they set that up as a staging area and more or less sent the ambulances in as needed, load up a victim, and start transporting to a hospital. But it was very tight with the roadways in that whole area. And again, you mentioned earlier about people waking up. There was a lot of people during the night that were coming out and trying to help out, bringing blankets, water, and things like that from the neighborhood coming on board. Luckily, in Rockaway, you have a large contingent of first responders, EMS, FDNY, and NYPD. So they hear sirens, and a lot of sirens. It gets a lot of people's attention. A lot of people that were sound asleep and hear all these sirens, they're going to wake up and find out what's going on. So we had a lot of assistance from off-duty members of the service coming on and helping us out. So it was not only the first responders, but the neighborhood pitched in as well.
Howard Blank, who's a retired member of the NYPD's Technical Assistance Response Unit, says, "Evening, guys. I was there. It looked like a movie. I'm sure it did. Helicopters, large ship running to the beach, and people everywhere. Reading the sprint job going to it, it sounded like an invasion. Originally, it said all these people were armed. Amazing job by all involved." And that's the thing. There's so much information going around. Sometimes, I remember Tom Von Essen saying this, not to me, but in a speech he was giving. Sometimes so much information is coming in, and it's not even the right information. So that's another thing. You're going down there, you're hearing all this, and then you're getting on the scene. Sometimes info coming in is still not even correct because nobody really knows for sure, at least while the situation's active. Working through that in order to make sure the operation runs smoothly, how do you determine what information is solid to go off of and what information your gut's telling you? By this point, you had a little bit of experience under your belt. You've been on the job a dozen years. Maybe that doesn't sound too right. I mean, not pay as much attention to that.
Right. Initially, we were, what we were faced with, we were watching with our own eyes, and we made our own decisions. As things got more organized, we started relying on the command staff, the chiefs on scene. They were coordinating with the other agencies on scene, so they were getting the information and relying it into us. We probably an hour or two later, we started hearing reports of the smugglers were armed on the ship. So that's why, hopefully, the battalion chief made that right decision, having NYPD board the ship rather than us. So, initially, I don't believe they wanted to board the ship because of that until they had more information. I think, like having aviation overhead and really getting a good view of who's on deck helped immensely with some intel what was going on in the ship. But other than that, I didn't hear that many rumors. The only rumors we had was there was a potential armed smugglers on the ship. That's what we heard initially. And then when PD first boarded, they came back and said, no, they're not armed, but we, who they had in custody or not, they controlled the ship from that point on. So it was a matter of, getting the people that were on the ship off the ships more safely with larger boats and bringing them to shore. But with every event, you always hear rumors what's going on, whether it's an explosion, who's armed, it's going to blow up, things like that. You always hear that. You're always putting that in the back of your mind. But you're faced with reality. You know what's right in front of you, and you still have to deal with the situation at hand.
Steve also adds, and again, retired NYPD lieutenant, and I thank you for adding this, Steve. At the time, Manhattan South was the only NYPD patrol borough to have a midnight task force, and they were mobilized out there for manpower, and boy, did it help, as Lieutenant Pena was just alluding to. I do, and we were talking off the air about the book, The Last Man Out, and I think this is a testament to Ray Downey because during the 80s, he spent a lot of time training you guys essentially for stuff like this. He wanted his guys to be prepared for the non-fire emergencies. So all those years, by this point, he'd been captain of the company for 13 years, just right before he left in 94. All those years of him drilling you guys some more on stuff like this, it paid off in dividends on this night.
Oh, definitely. Just having the capability of in-water rescue. Mainly, the program started as an under-peer firefighting program and then evolved into life-saving as well. So we had, the rescues, Rescue 5 and Rescue 2 at the time, or Rescue 1 at the time also, we were the closest to the water. So we were able to get there as quickly as possible and effect some rescue if we needed to. The program itself kept on evolving. The rescue companies started, bringing the program to the other rescues. So wound up with all 5 rescues, wound up being dive qualified after a while. So we had the, growing capability there. And plus, NYPD had the scuba unit at the beginning and then started transitioning into the ESU units as well. So that program started growing with the NYPD, as internally as well. So the capability of water rescues within New York City was probably none better in the United States.
None. The people, I remember Hashagen telling me exactly that when he was on the show a while ago. The people of the city are well served because both departments are so adept in it and train on it constantly for situations like this, and even situations where just one person is in the water struggling and may have gone under. Both departments are more than capable of making sure to effect a rescue. So, in that regard, when it comes to operating at this time of year, I mean, you mentioned, of course, you don't just train June, July, and August, but one downside to doing an operation like this, even if it's nighttime, sometimes there's those summer days where it's hot during the day, but it'll cool down at night. Sometimes there's those days, and we're both familiar with them, especially here in the Northeast, where it's hot 24/7 around the clock. Even if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, it still feels pretty warm outside. Even if you're in the water, heat can still be a factor. So, in regards to something like that, was it hot that night to where you're dealing with all this heavy equipment, you're sweating enough as it is, to where that potentially could have compromised the operation?
It didn't for the rescuers because we're so used to wearing the equipment and working. We had the adrenaline going for ourselves, but it was more of a challenge for the victims. We were saving them getting it out of the water, but the danger didn't end there. The hypothermia was still kicking in as they were on the sand. So, they were still losing body heat. They didn't have any fluids in them. So it was EMS that had the task of trying to, treat all these people at one time and try to get them as warm as possible. It wasn't get them out of the water that's safe. They could sit down and not worry about anything. They were still a medical emergency when they got on shore. So, EMS had to build up their capability as quickly as possible to start warming people up and start treating them with fluids and whatever. So as much with the rescue as we really don't think about it until later on, or if with a long duration, we might relieve people and start, exchanging people out to get some people a break. But otherwise, in the beginning, you just work until you told to stop. So it is the way it is for rescuers. But we were more concerned about the victims in the water and getting them on shore and getting them treated medically.
It's not just the coordination with the NYPD. I mean, like I said earlier, they are the two main agencies, and any major emergency, I guess you can throw in the Port Authority Police too, even though they didn't have anything to do with this particular operation. That would be the main ones in charge. But like I said at the top, EMS is still a separate entity. It's not under the FDNY umbrella yet. Besides the obvious, okay, let's get them on shore and treat them. What else did you need EMS to do? And tell me about coordinating specifically with them.
We didn't need them to do anything more than what they were doing. What the fire department and police department did was augment their staff with, our people, trying to get them to help them out as quickly as possible. What they did is, we took over some of, if we had to do compressions or administer oxygen and things like that, let the firefighter or police officer do that, and let the EMTs or paramedics deal with the more medical emergencies. So we were able to, relieve them of manpower by supplementing what they didn't have there. So that helped them a lot. EMS, again, it's New York City. They can bring in all the capabilities they can as quickly as possible. So once they got there, they got a little bit more organized and started setting up a triage and transporting. So they did a great job on that scene. There could have been many lives lost from hypothermia than what the 10 people that actually did perish.
There's an interesting point here mentioned in regards to the ship's journey, in which it said there were beatings by the gang enforcers on board, and so unfortunately several incidents of rape. So, as far as the second part of it, that's up to the NYPD to ascertain. But nonetheless, when somebody is assaulted to that degree, the injuries are obvious. Even if they've been in the water for a long time, sometimes you can still see that they were injured well before they ever hit the water. Was that something that, at that point in your dozen years of experience, you noticed right away on these victims once you got them to shore?
Not really. Because of the darkness, limited light we had. It wasn't probably until EMS did their examination that they noticed anything. We tried to get, what we did is grab somebody in the water, drag them out, put them on the sand, transport, for them into somebody, whether it be another fireman, police officer, to EMS to bring them up to the triage area. And we were just right back in the water. So we really didn't pay attention as much to the individual injuries as EMS would during the triage area.
So in something like this, fatigue does set in. The longer the operation goes, the more chance there is to get tired. And guys were coming back to the shore, getting equipment, what they needed. But even as the adrenaline's pumping, naturally the body can give out at some point. And nobody's Superman. That's why it's important to have a team of guys and gals on the scene. So as far as knowing when to switch out personnel, in an operation that's unique because you're switching them from land back to water and vice versa. Tell me about that part, especially for you, in the water, then back to shore, in the water, then back to shore.
That's the responsibility. When I put on my officer's cap, now I can talk about that. And it's up to the officer to really keep an eye on his men. As much as the officer's involved to rescue, operations, things like that, his main focus is to keep an eye on making sure they're safe and keep an eye and make sure that, who needs a break, doesn't need a break, who needs to, step out for a second, who's ferrying equipment back and forth without stopping, without taking a break, telling him to stop, sit down, let's sit down for a second. So mainly it's the responsibility of the officer of the company or the unit to really keep an eye on the guys. And it's challenging that way because as much as you see they're overloaded, starting to slow down, nobody wants to stop, whether it be police, fire, or EMS. It's very challenging for an officer to go up and say, look, I need to sit down, take a break. He goes, no, there's people still in the water. My job's not done yet. I got to, there's still lives to be saved type of thing. But, it depends on the situation. And if there are lives to be saved, you push yourself as much as you can and you keep on going. And there'll be time to rest afterwards. But, it gets to the point where the officer sees that, you're ready to drop. He's going to pull you off and put you onto the side. So it's the officer's call or the next guy next to you to, keep out, look out for your partner. So, that's how we look at things. We keep on going until we're told or we can't do it anymore.
When did the operation start to near its end?
We started getting a break when PD was, controlled the ship and people started coming off. We started accounting for all the people that were out of the water. We didn't see anybody else. There was discussion now, do we need to start scuba operations? Is anybody accounted for? And I think the decision was, let's hold off until we get a good count of what's going on. If anybody's underwater at this point, they're not savable anyway. So let's not put anybody else in danger. So it was a point to slow everything down. No one's coming off the ship. No one's in the water. Let's just deal with the patients on shore, getting them transported or, taken care of and go from there. So at that time, we were able to sit down and just, take in the whole situation. And like the gentleman said earlier, it was like a movie set. It was like, the helicopter overhead with searchlight, the ship grounded, people all over the place, lights and sirens going on. So it was an overwhelming experience, dealing with it. And the amount of people that were in the water was, astronomical. It was, you didn't look anywhere in the water where you didn't see a head bobbing up and down. So anywhere you went, you just grabbed a body and just pulled them out.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, talking about this the first time you were on and talking about this with some other divers who've been on, it's often been said you don't go by sight, you go by feel because it is the middle of the night. But you just mentioned heads bobbing up. You see them all over the place. And obviously you have the lights from the emergency service vehicles that are on the scene helping you to an extent as well. Aviation overhead and the lights that they're providing. It had to, in a sense, and I apologize if this seems like a silly question. It's not meant to be. Did it kind of go against every principle usually in a scuba operation, given the enormity of the ship, the enormity of the people that needed to be rescued, and just the general unusual nature of the situation?
I mean, luckily, they were mainly surface victims. If this was a scuba operation,
can you say that again? Because you cut out a little bit. My apologies, cut out a little bit there for a second.
We were very lucky because this is a surface rescue operation. Most people are above the water. If this had been the other way, where we saw people going underwater and we had to deploy divers, both fire department and NYPD, it would have been an extreme challenge with the surf, the current, the situation itself. So we were extremely lucky that way. We were very lucky that we were able to get the people that were deceased out of the water as quickly as possible. And, luckily we didn't have to, start a scuba operation because between all the natural, effects with the water, current, things like that, we still had a ship right there rocking back and forth. So, and the jetty right next to us. So it would have been very precarious to put divers in the water at that time. If we had to do it, we would have done it. but it would have been a lot more challenging than just going in for one or two people doing a surf rescue.
I have here that the aftermath of this, a couple of years later, Li Peng Fei, also, and if I get the names wrong, folks, for those of you that might be Asian, I apologize. I'm not trying to mispronounce them, but they're tough names to pronounce. Also known as Li Xiao Quang, and Charlie was described at his trial as the mastermind behind Golden Venture. He had not been on board the ship, but had ordered the grounding from his apartment in Chinatown. He lived lavishly, like most of these gangsters do from their ill-gotten means. The Taiwan citizen was arrested in Thailand in November of 1995 while polishing his $89,000 Mercedes-Benz and was later sentenced to 20 years in prison, December 2nd, 1998, where it says here in that article regarding his sentencing, the immigrants who had made various down payments to get aboard were to pay the rest of the $30,000 fee after their illegal arrival into the United States. Nearly all of those who made it to shore were quickly rounded up, and many spent up to 3.5 years in American jails after their voyage, which cast a sharp spotlight on the widespread and lucrative smuggling of Chinese people to America. Of course, it goes on to say that the others involved with Mr. Chang, the others who pleaded guilty to various charges, received sentences that ranged from less than a year to 10 years in prison. And it says he would have faced 80 years in prison, but the 20-year sentence he got was far above the 3-year maximum suggested under the federal sentencing guidelines, and rightfully so. So going back to the night itself, and he got out, unfortunately, in 2018, his sentence was up. But that said, going back to the night itself, you get back to quarters after a lengthy operation like that. There's always that discussion at the kitchen table. And I imagine this one was different than most of, okay, what did we do? How could we have done it better? The natural critiquing process. What was this discussion like?
Well, before I get to that, I just want to go back to, to start that conversation, is looking at the scene, as at that time I was a firefighter. So it was a little bit different for me than an officer on scene. I had to look over the company itself. But, put yourself in a position of the incident commanders on scene at that time, where you had, hundreds of responders that you were in charge of. You had a gigantic ship in front of you with people in the water all over the place. You had a medical emergencies going on, right in the sand there. What were they thinking? What was going on? How were they going to approach this? This wasn't your normal, house fire or a hostage situation or anything like that. It was probably overwhelming for them as well to really get control of what's actually going on there. What decisions did they make right away that, how do we control this? Where are all our people? Make sure nobody gets hurt. Make sure we're able to save lives and get people out of the water. What were they thinking? What other resources do they need at the scene? We spoke about it earlier with the access to the area. What vehicles do you need to get in there? As time went on, they were trying to get searchlight units and light trucks, as close as possible. But because of the access to the roads, they weren't able to. So, what type of portable generators and lights do we have available? How do we get them onto the sand? Things like that. So as an incident commander, I can't even imagine how their minds were going and trying to coordinate how many different agencies. And especially when the sun started coming up, now you had the federal agencies starting to respond. So, throwing more into the mix, on the incident command level, the chain of command and who was in charge probably flipped and flopped thousands of times. I think hopefully, the way the operation went with the New York City agencies, I think the unified command worked pretty well that night. I think everybody had a job to do. Everybody stayed in line. Everybody did what they needed to do. Everybody had the resources needed to, perform their rescues. Now you're getting outside agencies coming in, and it started a whole new ball game. What are they doing? What's going on? Start asking questions, the accountability questions. How many people? Where are they from? And the investigation is still ongoing. So it was probably a large challenge for a lot of the law enforcement agencies to start answering questions right away with an ongoing investigation like that. So I can't even imagine what they were thinking. And yet for them to go back to the firehouse or, precinct and start critiquing what was going on, they probably had, pockets full of notes and scribed on pieces of paper on the back of their hands and everything else. And for us as a one unit going back to the firehouse is, what could we do differently? What went right? What went wrong? What could we have? What equipment did we not have that we could have brought with us? What equipment was not useful for that type of operation? Especially at night, the first couple of hours, it was all by, hand lights. That was the only illumination on site. So it was very challenging that way. So, we're trying to, we have, do we need to bring more lighting with us? Most of the vehicles have light towers, could we put them in operation a lot quicker? So the critique it probably went on for a couple of days, and each tour came in, started asking questions. What'd you do? Why'd you do this? Why didn't you do that? But, these are things that we always learn upon, those lessons learned. The next drill we have is if we have multiple people in the water and we're originally operating with, putting one diver in at a time, that's thrown out the window now. Now we have to put everybody into a dry suit or exposure suit and get into the water. So now, accountability comes into play. Usually we play it very safe. We always have a backup diver on shore. If we don't have that backup diver on shore, what do? Do we take that chance or do we wait? So there's a lot of variables that, we're thrown into this now. If we need to throw everybody into the water, we're not relying on our safety anymore. We're putting ourselves in more challenging positions.
And I think this is a testament to also the skill and acumen on everybody on the scene. Because remember, it's not just EMS and FDNY and NYPD. The Parks Police was there; they had to participate in the which I didn't even know until I did the research for this show. That New York City as a whole even had the Parks Police. I knew of their existence in other parts of the country. I just didn't know the city had them. And then again, the city has 50 different police departments
Right.
that many don't know about unless you do your research on them. Of course, INS was there, and maybe they had to participate in the rescue first before the investigation part followed. So it was a lot. And I think, and this is the key thing that I wanted to highlight, OEM didn't come along, Office of Emergency Management, for those that don't know, until a few years later. So that's just pre-OEM, when at least now in the OEM era, everybody has an idea of what their role is, where they're supposed to be, and what they have to do. Here, you're just going off of what you're seeing in front of you and ascertaining where you need to be, what you're going to have to do, and how it's going to help or
Right.
not help even in the situation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a situation like that, there was so many lives to be saved that, we probably all operated as one contiguous unit. Everything went so smoothly, getting people out of the water. There was no issues. There's no rivalry back and forth between the different departments. Everybody did their job. Everybody shared information, shared equipment, helped each other out. I mean, it was flawless the way all three agencies worked together that night.
So you became an officer, a couple of years after this, and you were kind of alluding to it now, thinking in the form of an incident commander. You had some interesting incidents that would come after that. We were talking off the air about, and even on the air a little bit about the crane collapse in '98, which was far less severe emergency than this was, but nonetheless a big one. So how do you feel the lessons you took from this incident helped you once you became a lieutenant later on?
It puts everything in a different perspective. As an officer, like I said earlier, you're responsible for the guys and girls in your company. You have to look out for them. It's a funny saying with as an officer in a rescue, probably in emergency service as well, is you're not there to push people into the situations. You're there to pull them out in case it gets too dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very prevalent in the rescue companies where, as an officer, you're working with very aggressive firefighters and things like that, where you got to keep an eye on everybody. You got to keep your head on a swivel, making sure everybody's accountable, doing their job, keeping themselves safe. They're going to take, challenges and put themselves into very precarious positions. And you got to make sure they're able to get out, or somebody's there to get them out. So it's, dealing with very aggressive people, you have to be that father figure almost, and tell them let's stop where you are. Let's back up a little bit. Let's, let it do what it has to do, and then we'll go back in, type of thing. So, but there's a fine line there that you want to make sure that we're getting the job done. We're being as aggressive as we can, but as an officer, you have that hair on your back of your neck that comes up every once in a while. That like this doesn't look right. Based on experience or knowledge or whatever. That just let's back out here a second and just take our time or do it this way. That's more safe.
And what's the key? Everybody has to come home at the
Exactly.
end of it. Everybody has to go home. Even if you have to send them home via the hospital, sometimes if a guy gets banged up, you don't want to get banged up, but it's part of the job. Unfortunately, people do get hurt. As long as they get home after that, that is the key. So, I'll ask you, yesterday, as I mentioned at the top, was 29 years. Here we are all these years later in New York City. All emergency agencies in New York City are very well prepared to respond to large scale emergencies. That, of course, was bred out of the tragedy of 9/11. But here we are with, like I said, an unusual operation that you hadn't really seen before and you haven't seen since, thankfully. When you look back on this job 29 years later, besides, of course, the great job the first responders did that night, expand on what you said earlier, and what are your reflections on it?
I think, not only that night, but how far the fire department has come with the water safety operations, water rescue operations. They have outfitted companies along the water lines on beaches and things like that, especially in the Rockaways, with surf rescue, outfitting them with surfboards, life-saving boards, exposure suits, dry suits, to effect rescues right away on surface victims. If we had that capability back then in 1993, it would have made everyone's job a lot easier with the capability you have today. So, we look back and what lessons were taken from that event and built upon with the, scuba operations with the fire department, especially. The training that's involved now with the companies along the water. It's not only the special operations company, but it's all, first line companies that are being trained in water rescues. So it's definitely helping the civilian population with protection, especially along the water and the beaches, to have that capability within 3 or 4 minutes away. So that's expanded the program greatly for the fire department.
And if I had to guess, when Chief Downey, and I would have loved to pick his brain on this amongst a billion other things, when Chief Downey formed SOC in 1998, about 5 years and a month later, in July of 98, when we got the squads, I guarantee you this was probably, besides terrorism, of course, as was mentioned in the last, but now I guarantee you this job was probably one of the jobs that went through his head in terms of what he wanted SOC to be prepared for.
Yes, I think, develop the capabilities within special operations at all. The rescue companies, always had the capability, to handle any situation. It's like, 1,000 jobs, what do you specialize in? We specialize in all of them. What does that mean? So it's, what Downey did is, built up the rescue school, the fire department rescue school, the technical rescue school, where we started training individuals going into special operations. Very similar to the emergency service school. Now you're getting, certified with programs that, and trained on certain specialties that normally would just be thrown into an exposure suit or a dry suit, and they push you into the water type of thing. So now it's more of a formal program and more, formal training, more hands-on training. So you're coming to the companies with a little bit more expertise than, learning in the firehouse per se, So what we, built with the rescue school, and not only with the rescue, with the dive program, with collapse rescue, rope training, fire rescue training, collapse training. So that specialties has been built upon, and the training programs have, gotten better and better each year. When I first went to the rescue companies in 1985, we just had a handful of tools on the truck. It was, a grip hoist, some shoring equipment, things like that, torches. We had the scuba program going on, so it was a little bit that. Over the years, that rig shop's gotten bigger and bigger, more and more equipment. So we got better equipment, better training, ability just expanded. So again, the benefit to the city to having that capability was extremely grateful for them, to have that capability across the entire city, not only with the special operations, but then when you brought on the squad companies with that capability as well, and then expanding into the line companies with water rescue. So it just grew from that. It's even after 2001, it was still growing after that and getting more specialized.
And I said this before, and it's so true. If you look at the heavy rescue rigs of both NYPD, EXU, FDNY now with the rescues and the squads, not only are the big toolboxes, but they're about, if you count the equipment and just the trucks alone, even without the equipment on it, it's about a $2 million investment. But as emergencies like this prove, it's a worthy investment, because look at how well you guys were able to do that night under some very, very murky, literally murky circumstances.
Exactly. I mean, going back to the, early days of the rescue companies or emergency service companies. We didn't have unlimited budgets. We broke a tool, we might not get it replaced for a couple of weeks, if not months.
Yeah.
Things started changing when the city started realizing that they needed to, enhance the budgets, especially with the fire department. Getting equipment, getting new equipment, testing new equipment. We would have programs within Special Operations, Command and the rescue companies to test tools, what would work better. From the first Hearst tools now to battery-operated Hearst tools, the technology has come such a long way that, lightning and load, the tool used to weigh 85 pounds, now weighs like, 35 pounds.
Right.
So, the technology is there. Now, finally, the budget's there to able to enhance the capability with tools and equipment. So it's much, much greater than when, especially when I first started back in the early 80s, in the mid 80s.
As it should be. So the hour's flown by. Wow, that's pretty good. This was a quick show, man. It feels like we just started, but this was a good callback, I should say. I'm losing the words now because, like I said at the top, my brains are fried. Of an incident that I'm not too sure that many people recall, unless you were living in the area at the time or you just have a great memory. There's so many things from that time period in New York in the 80s, the 90s, the early aughts that a lot of people just forget happened. So it's nice to do shows like this and remind not the audience, not just of what happened, but of the great rescue work that was done. So I thank you for that. Is there any shout outs that you want to give?
No, but I want to give a quick side note. The Golden Venture, the ship itself, was put into service after that by a company that was going cargo back and forth between the Caribbean islands. And then it was, dry docked, and Palm Beach County down here in Florida wound up purchasing it, sinking it, and using it as an artificial reef right offshore here in like 70 feet of water. So the Golden Venture is right off here at the coast of Florida right now.
Yeah, that was in August of 2000 that they did that. That they turned it into that. So I'm like, well, listen, and at least there's an opportunity now for it to serve a better use than what it was being used for. But it did shed a light, I think, on trafficking then. I mean, trafficking is something that's being discussed a lot now on the law enforcement side and, of course, in various news reports. And that was really the first instance where people saw. I mean, I'm sure they never denied it was a problem, but it's one of those things where now you realize just how big of a problem it is. And that was a story that dragged on for the rest of the 90s in regards to what those people on that ship had to endure. Not even that night itself, but just afterwards. And it's still dragging on today. So if anybody was in Chinatown during that era or living in Fort Tilden, which is the part of the Rockaways where this ship ran ashore, they certainly remember it. So, like I said, I thank you for coming back and detailing it with me tonight. Don't go away just yet. We'll sign off the air, of course. But folks, coming up next on the Mike the New Haven podcast, nothing. I'm going to be on break from June 8th through June 30th. I just want to enjoy the summer. I've been at it nonstop since January. So I take 2 breaks during the year, one in December and one in June. I'm taking the summer break. So you'll get the best of the Mike the New Haven podcast, which, Lieutenant, you'll be featured in twice for your first appearance and, of course, for tonight's appearance as well. So be on the lookout for that, as well as some other cool projects that I'm working on. But, yeah, I'll be on a hiatus otherwise, June 8th. Until June 30th. I won't return for new shows until Friday, July 1st, barring anything unforeseen. A special thank you to everybody that tuned in tonight. There's a lot of you, so I won't mention you guys specifically because I don't want to miss anybody, but thank you very much for your support tonight and really throughout the year for this show and throughout the years, really, from when this show first came back after a 2-year layoff in 2020. In the meantime, on behalf of Mike Pena, this has been Lieutenant Mike Pena, that is, Volume 19 of the Best of the Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. I'm Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. And, oh, by the way, let's go Rangers.